All righty. Okay. Looks like we're in here. Looks like we're live. Allegedly, we're live. I'm never really sure personally. I just sort of like, yes, we are. Have you guys ever done that, by the way, where you've like recorded into an episode and then like 10 minutes in, you realize, oh crap, we've been recording?
Of course.
Yes. So I'm going to go ahead and kick us off with doing an intro for the episode to sort of frame things. I know this may not be the intro that I eventually use on the podcast, but I might as well sort of do it for the people who are on the live to kind of just frame it out. So please feel free to make fun of me as I stumble over my words and all that fun stuff. So I'll go ahead and get us started. So Don Pasela was born to Ed and Karen Pasela on June 28th, 1985. Dawn was homeschooled and a part of a group that had strict traditions down to a dress code where she was expected to wear dark pants and a white blouse, even as a preteen. But Dawn's parents said a rebellious and high-spirited personality emerged in her childhood and developed as she grew into a young woman. Dawn's parents described her as a contrarian and once told the website Uncovered that if you told Dawn that the sky was blue, she would tell you it was pink. Dawn's mom, Karen, said she was always surrounded by friends, telling the website that, quote, I don't think we ever had a weekend where we didn't have someone sleeping over. Dawn was a leader among her peers, often roping them into pushing buttons of their parents and other authority figures. Dawn's mom tells a story about how she got all of her friends together and they spent the afternoon on the phone calling Dillard's, Macy, Victoria's Secret store. Hold on, let me pause there. What happened to poor Dana?
Oh no.
Billy got kicked out.
Dana, you got kicked out.
I have no idea why.
You threw off my roll, so I'm going to start
I'm
again.
so
So-
sorry.
No,
Okay, wait a minute. I just want to say that Dawn's last name is pronounced Pasela.
Pasela.
Mhm.
So that
Yes.
saved me. All right. So I will definitely be doing that part over again. So Dawn's mom tells a story about how all her friends got together. They spent the afternoon on the phone calling Dillard's, Macy's, and Victoria's Secret stores in the area, looking for bras that were really bright to peek through their white shirts. Even though Dawn had an anti-authoritarian streak, she did well in school, graduating with honors from Cuyahoga Community College and then Cleveland State University, where she studied finance. Even though she died on April 25th, 2012, you can still find her LinkedIn page where it lists her as a member of the Criminal Justice Club, Phi Theta Kappa, and the National Honor Society. She was also on the Dean's List at Cuyahoga. Soon after college, Dawn joined the Ohio Attorney General's office and was assigned to a multi-jurisdictional task force where she worked as an office manager and helped out on an investigation into a man accused of mortgage fraud, Tony Viola. Soon Dawn noticed questionable behavior and eventually reached out to Viola's defense team with an offer to testify on his behalf. Just before she was scheduled to testify, Dawn was found dead in her apartment with a blood alcohol level of above 0.59. Her death was ruled an accident. Today, we're joined by Dana Pohl, who spent nearly 2 decades investigating and telling the stories of missing and unidentified. Lexi, pronounce your last name. I always get it wrong. All right, Lexi Kakis, who researched cold cases for Uncovered and is the co-host of the Broken System podcast, and Andrea Cipriano, a journalist who's investigated many of these same kinds of cases. So, guys, I'm going to give you a chance to go ahead and introduce yourselves. I'm really excited to have you on. Dana's been on the podcast before. We had a great episode, I think it was a few weeks ago. It came out on the feed where we explored Cobb County Jane Doe case, which was not far from where I grew up as a kid, and some of Dana's work, which I find really powerful and meaningful. And so it's great to have all of you guys on. So I'll go ahead, since, I'll go ahead and throw it to you, Dana, to go give an introduction of yourself. You'll do a much better job than I will.
Well, thank you for having us here tonight. I'm excited to be here. And my name is Dana Pohl. I am a cold case researcher. I am a podcaster. I am a librarian. I have been, like you said, researching the missing and the unidentified for close to 20 years. I almost hate to say that, but it's true. And when I'm not doing research, I enjoy traveling. I enjoy visiting distilleries and breweries with my husband and my dog Rebel, and we also like to kayak. So that's a big thing. I can't wait till summer comes around and we get to jump in the boat and spend a day on the lake.
Nice. Which lake is it?
It's Lake Lanier, which
yes, of course.
Yeah.
Right.
People are like, "You're crazy, you got on that lake," because there's a lot of stories about it, but so far we're okay. So yeah.
So who wants to go next? Lexi?
Sure. So I'm Lexi. I'm a New York based researcher. I was working for Uncovered for the last 2 years, and then most recently I am the co-host of the Broken System podcast with Robert Palmer. And then really the last several months, this project has consumed so much energy and time, and it's been really cool to kind of watch it take form. But aside from true crime, I would say I'm really into watching a lot of television. Some not like some of it's kind of trash television, but I love it. Reading, music, that kind of thing. Being with like friends and family, big fan of dogs, that sort of thing. So
we love it. Trash TV is not a bad thing.
All day. No. All day long.
Like comfort food.
Yes. Very good at it.
So true. So, hi everybody. I'm Andrea. I'm a New York City-based forensic psychologist, journalist, and a victim advocate. I graduated with a master's in forensic psychology from John Jay College of Criminal Justice, where I pretty much just focused on researching and peeling back the criminal mind. For 2 years, I've been a case researcher and the digital content specialist at Uncovered. And beyond the justice space, I am a new running enthusiast, emphasis on enthusiast. Ooh. And I love listening to EDM music and going to concerts.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. So how did you guys, I'm just curious for all of you guys, I know a little bit about Dana's background in terms of like exploring cases like this. How did you end up on the path that you ended up on that got you here? Lexi, you want to take a swing at it?
I can take it first. Yeah. So I had found, I was listening to a lot of podcasts over the last 2 years, and I was like, oh, I want to do something to help. But I didn't know what that thing was, what that meant, or whatever. I was truly just like a consumer of it, but I thought it was really interesting. And then I found Uncovered, and I was a community member for a while. And then I became on the
Uncovered team. Is the group that explores like missing persons.
Yeah, so it's a database, and then there was also a community component. And just so from doing a lot of that work, the first case I researched was a Melissa Witt case, and that one is still near and dear to my heart. Because I kind of realized it happened in 1994. I was born in that same year, like literally like a month and 2 weeks when she went missing. So it was very bizarre from that perspective. And I just kind of fell down the rabbit hole. And then slowly but surely I met Dana and then Andrea, and it kind of just all meshed together really well.
And you and Robert on Broken Systems have a upcoming episode with LaDonna Humphrey, right?
That's dropping on Monday.
Exciting for you?
Oh, yeah, super. I love chatting with LaDonna and Robert, so it's always a good time.
That's awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to it. I think it's out tomorrow, right? Tomorrow or Monday?
Monday, yeah.
Oh, very cool. So, Andrea, how about you?
Yeah, so I grew up watching like all of the true crime TV shows. Like Criminal Minds was like just a drug to me, honestly. And, and then going from scripted crime TV to then watching unscripted, I was like, wait, oh my God, this stuff actually happens. And then so in high school, I pretty much knew like right away, okay, I definitely want to be in the criminal justice field. And so originally when I went to college at John Jay, I was just studying criminal justice. And my plan was to join the NYPD. I wanted to work in the cold case unit there. And so when I was a sophomore, I started at the NYPD orientation for cadets. And not even 24 hours after I started my orientation, I broke my foot. So that, knocked me out. I couldn't walk for 8 to 12 weeks. So the NYPD said, you have to come back like the next time the cadet stuff rolls around.
Right.
And I mean, that felt so crushing to me because I was like, I want to do this now. I don't want to wait next summer. So I kind of took that time to reevaluate, why is it that I want to do this? Because it's not so much law enforcement, it was cold cases. So from there, I had like a little blog that I called the Crime Sheet. And I just kind of covered like documentaries and local cold cases in New York. Because it was just like, I wanted a place to kind of share what I was thinking and what was going on in the space. And from there, that's how I connected to Uncovered, where I was using Uncovered to research cases. And then it was just kind of like a really natural synergy of just starting to work there. So, yeah.
Very cool. So when you were in college and you were thinking about, like being on the NYPD cold case unit, did you ever trip across the book Restless Sleep?
It's here.
It's
I
right
have it.
there on your bookshelf,
Yes.
right? Yeah, it's a really great
Yes.
book about the cold case squad.
Yes.
And it was so moving for me because there's this one case from, I think the book came out like 2000, I don't know, 9.
It's older. Yeah.
But there was a case from like the 1950s that they were investigating, and the author's like asking the detective, why do you care? Or why are you investigating it? And this point is like, well, because I'm the last one who does. Like that.
Yeah.
And I just always thought that was like really powerful and probably like salient to a lot of these cases, because as they become cold and people pass away or they don't pass away. I was talking to Bruce Maitland, Breonna Maitland's father, about this, that even before people pass away, many just need to move on from the case. There aren't people left over time. So there's something to be said for the people who do continue to pursue these cases long afterwards. And Dana, you're last but not least.
I guess I've always been a mystery lover. I read mysteries as a kid. I loved watching all of the crime shows. I am a why child. I want to know why things happen, what happened. I guess I'm the who, what, when, why child. And so I started out with that kind of core curiosity that drove me, I think, to move in the direction of becoming a journalist. And then again, towards becoming a librarian, because when I went as an undergraduate student to Point Park University in Pittsburgh, I thought my librarian was like, she was my savior. We had to do these research projects and I didn't know where to find the resources or how to use the resources. And of course, then nothing was online. It was all, you had to go to the library and you
catalogs.
had to, yes, and you had to dig around and you had to know where you were supposed to be digging. And so I was very inspired by her. She helped me all the time. And I didn't realize at the time that I would later pursue a master's in library and information science, but I did. And I think that's really what inspired that. I wanted to know, and I wanted to know how to utilize the internet, which was then in 2000, just something that we could dial into and start really utilizing. And I think that's what really inspired me. And so doing that, then starting the research that I did, and then finding Uncovered when it came online and joining the community and leading some research groups, it was like a dream come true to surround myself with people who wanted to do this work and were just as curious as I was, and who really were focused on being an advocate, helping families find answers.
Right.
We know that resources are limited. We know that law enforcement not every department has a cold case unit. And so to be able to be a member of the public and maybe help to be a citizen detective, or to be a concerned citizen, or to be a case advocate, as I like to call myself, that's inspiring. That's hopeful. That gives just families something to grasp onto. There's people out there who care about my family member's case.
Yeah. And sometimes, like, in one episode recently, I had the uncle of somebody who's missing on, and there was another episode that was like this, where it, I had asked about, like, what do we, general public people do to help? And, they talked about, like, you can, you can donate to this, you can do that, or you can just be there. You can just be there and care. And it makes a lot of difference to them. We were talking about this off mic before we got started. And I was saying that, like, if you made up this story and I were a literary agent, the story of Dawn in this case, I would tell you, like, this is way too far-fetched. No one's going to believe it or buy it. So I was hoping you guys could sort of, like, summarize a little bit about Dawn's case, and maybe, maybe a good way to start, even before we get to Dawn's case and its the unfathomable things that happened, and is a little bit about Dawn's life before she died. I would love to, like, find out more about who she was, because I think, and it makes sense in the true crime community, we care so much about sort of, like, what happened and getting to justice, but sometimes I feel like we flatten and lose the person that was, like, the real world person that was there. So, do you anyone want to, Lexi, you want to start us, or Andrea? I see smiles all around. Whichever one of you knows more.
Well, it's interesting because as far as acquiring the case, I think Andrea was the first one to really touch it and kind of dive into it, and then she brought us in after the fact, because she was like, "Oh, like, I definitely need more eyes on this." But as far as, like, I said this in our, like, Meet the Host episode, but as we got to learn more about who Dawn was as a person, like, we knew she was incredibly kind and caring, and she was a fierce advocate for justice, and there were so many different, like, little things about her that I think we all saw in her that we were like, oh, if she was around today, like, we would all be her friend. And so it was a very natural decision to want to advocate for her. Because I think, like, if something like that happened to any of our friends, like, we would advocate for them without thinking about it. So taking on Dawn's case was kind of a no-brainer. But there's just so many small things about her, how she would volunteer at, like, dog shelters and would give people flowers and such. Like, she was just such a sweet and kind person, and it's so upsetting to see what would ultimately happen to her. But
Yeah.
It's hard to picture in a picture holding a dog or smiling with someone, or and it's kind of, actually, it was sad for me looking through the pictures of when she was younger, and, like, all this brightness and light, and then there's that handful of pictures that are very close to when she dies, and you can see that, like, there's a little something missing. But Andrea, you were saying?
Yeah. Well, I mean, even just to, like, continue on that, I think that's something that we've all felt really strongly about. Is, you're absolutely right. Like, the photos of Dawn when she's younger, and even as she is an adult, her vibrancy is so clear. And I think what some of the harder photos of her later in life really show is that the stress that she was under and the turmoil that she was experiencing at her job, and, and then internally, was so real. And I think that's one of the things that is kind of hard for some people to grasp in this case is, oh, like, how could you be so afraid of some threats and blah, blah, blah. Oh, it wasn't that bad. But it genuinely was, for Dawn. And yeah, I was just going to share, so last spring, Tony had reached out to Uncovered and just said in an email, I want to submit this suspicious death to the Uncovered database. And, you know, I have a lot of documentation. I worked with Dawn. She helped exonerate me. Please help us. And so, you know, yeah, I mean, we get emails like that pretty often at Uncovered. So it's easy to kind of just like have it fall into an inbox. But one of the things that really struck me differently about this case was Tony had mentioned in his email, go to the free TonyViola.com site and you will find every document you want. And anybody who does cold case research or, you know, stuff like this, we all know like documents are king. And so to have someone come to us and say, I have almost everything you can imagine.
I've already been doing, it's almost like he was
Yes.
already doing the work before.
Yeah. And so it was like, okay, like I'm going to take a look at this. And so I did. And then we had reached out, we had a meeting with Tony of just like, who is this guy? Like, I want to make sure that he's, you know, legit and sane, essentially. And I've always been blown away by how articulate Tony is. And his story is so true, you know? And I mean, like you were saying earlier, Jason, it's so easy to take a look at this entire case and say, oh my God, it's just a movie, you know?
Yeah, no. It's like the letters when I was a reporter at the Times that we would get from the prison inmates. It's like, yeah, sure.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Right. Thanks for sending it.
Yeah, but it's really helpful when somebody has come to you doing a ton of the legwork and doing it. One of the things I know I had read about Dawn being, you know, interested in criminal justice, and it just struck me as you were speaking, thinking about you as the first one to get, there's so many parallels, right?
Yeah.
Like, you guys probably had a lot, like there was probably a lot about her that you could relate to in particular, Andrea, right?
Yeah. I mean, and I'm sure we'll get into more of it as we keep going. I mean, for me personally, some of the parallels continue. But I very much like seeing Dawn's case, and Lexi was saying this before too. I could see a parallel universe where like her and I are in the same college class together, or we're coworkers at just a job. And seeing those types of parallels, it really feels like advocating for a friend. And I know we didn't know her in life, but it feels like we're kind of getting that chance now. And I think that's part of why the three of us feel so strongly about this is like Dawn could easily fit into this friend group. And that's,
she'd be a third co-host. Like, she'd be the fourth co-host for sure.
She could be here with
us
now, like literally. I could.
And she'd do it so well.
I think, I'm sorry. I just wanted to say that I think Dawn was brilliant. I think that when you listen to Tony talk about the advice that she gave him, she knew the ins and outs of his case better than he did, as he stated last week in our live. She was really knowledgeable about the legal side of all of this. I mean, she was giving him advice and making sure that she was looking at the big picture and really understanding how Tony could win his case. And I did not realize that was what was happening until Tony laid it out for us. So I think that, to me, she was very smart. She learned very quickly. Tony has said people thought she could be the governor. I mean, they thought she was on a track to really be a successful, strong woman, career woman, in whatever she chose. And so I think like that is heartbreaking to me. I mean, because it's just, that was taken away from her.
Like, what did we lose too?
Right.
Like, what did we collectively lose when we'll never know, but like you're saying, there are these clues and there are these elements there. You know, I was thinking about just her, you know, we talked in the intro about her being sort of like a little bit rebellious and anti-authoritarian, but that she did really, really, really well in school and she was on a great trajectory, it sounded like. And, you know, just thinking about sort of like all that promise that you guys are talking about and her graduating college and then heading off to work, right? Because I imagine coming out of like college as a criminal justice major and getting a job at the Ohio Attorney General's office, like cleaning the floors is a big deal, right? Like anything for that. And Where did it go from that promise to eventually, even before you get to her death, it becomes tragic, right? Like on so many levels, because I think about young people coming with all that optimism and enthusiasm and ending up in an environment where, you know, even if she hadn't ended up dead, certainly things did not seem particularly ethical or,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Think of all those people who have their dreams shattered in that moment. I was just wondering, how did we get there? How did she get there?
Yeah. Well, we know. So while she was graduating college, one of Dawn's criminal justice professors, Arvin Klar, he suggested that Dawn apply for an open position at the Ohio Attorney General's office. And so it was then in 2008 where she's hired by prosecutors Dan Caceres and Mark Bennett. And I mean, like you said, she was an office manager of this, what they called the nation's largest mortgage fraud case. I mean, you're right. Like if she were getting coffee for someone, that would be a huge deal. But her own resume says she was in charge of receiving evidence. She created the chain of custody for files, and she had to help prepare cases for trial. And this is like right out of college. I mean,
She was really giving investigative support, even though.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
right. So, but I mean, it's within the first year that she starts witnessing a lot of this misconduct.
Okay. What was it for her that she first noticed?
So I think what she told her parents was she wasn't liking the way they were handling the folders and files and boxes of evidence. She felt like they were stacking them in hallways, that there was no sort of control or security over them, and that people anyone could take anything. And that was very disturbing to her. So that was one of the things that she brought to the attention of her family or complained about and said, you know what, this doesn't feel right to me. There were some requests made of her to wear a wire to tape conversations at Tony's fundraising events, and also to write a check. And it would be, they gave her the money, she wrote a personal check. And so basically she was befriending Tony, but hiding the secret. And when she started doing it, she thought she was doing it for the right reasons.
To support the investigation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. But then along the way, she realized that something was terribly wrong. And that basically they had put her in a position where she was committing crimes by wearing a wire and, writing checks, and for them to do kind of shady things
So
to find information.
Wearing a wire without a judge's order or wiretapping order?
Yeah,
So
it was
wearing
self-serving for them.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well, how would they have so they would have never been able to use it as evidence. So what was it they were trying to get by putting her on a wire? Because that's almost scarier to me. And I just say that because if all of a sudden the prosecutor's recording me, that's one thing, right? They're going to use that as evidence against me. But if they're recording me in a way that they can never use at trial, I would be even more concerned. Because what is the plan here? What are you doing with this? What are you trying to find out? Yeah.
I think that's part of the whole problem, is that it wasn't that they were necessarily looking for evidence per se. It was that they didn't understand what Tony's defense strategy was going to be. And I think a big part of that is because, as we know now, Tony was innocent of all the crimes that he was being accused of. So the prosecutors, they weren't able to find evidence that proved that he was guilty. So they thought that he was just this master criminal who could hide everything so well that it literally doesn't exist. So to get Dawn to wear a wire was to try to understand like what his strategy was going to be. And, I mean, ultimately through Dawn's, connection with Tony and meeting everybody who supported him, she started to realize like, wait, this guy is innocent. He actually isn't guilty.
So it's like this no-win situation for Tony. Like, you look very guilty because we're finding all this evidence you're guilty. But if you don't look very guilty, because we're not finding evidence, then you're just the super master criminal.
It was pretty much that. I mean, they backed themselves into a corner of Tony must be guilty of all these crimes because no evidence exists, but somehow he's got roped up into this task force and being accused of defrauding banks. So they just said he has to be essentially a mastermind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, and what was the purpose of the check? Just to befriend him, or was there?
No, I think they wanted to acquire the banking information.
So they wanted to know where it was cached. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Tony actually threw in 2 comments into the chat too to kind of give context. So one of them, Dawn wore a wire to record me after I was indicted. They wanted defense trial preparations. I was already indicted. If the government wants to talk to me, they should call my attorney. And then he said it's illegal for prosecutors to interfere with defense trial preparation. Dawn was illegally invading the 6th Amendment right to legal representation. The government still has never produced them. So those recordings. That's actually something Tony's in the midst of trying to acquire currently.
So unclear, right? If they have them, or are they acknowledging they have them, or no?
They're acknowledging that they exist,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not acknowledging where they are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we end up having a situation where she's like young, out of college. I don't know if she like had lots of friends around still, or support, or what her support network is, but I imagine among most people who are 24, 25, 26, you're not dealing with like these heavy kinds of issues. She's got her parents to rely on, to bounce ideas off of. But for the most part, like most people that age, unless you're me, of course, you're just, you're working for these people, you're admiring them, you're looking up to them, and you're following their lead because you just naturally trust them, it sounds like. And she ends up getting into what she later realizes is like totally unethical behavior. What was it that, and I know she eventually reaches out to Tony's defense team. What was it that led her to eventually do that? Because I'm just thinking about like imagining myself in her position when I was like 24, 25, 26. I would be scared out of my mind. Even if it wasn't law enforcement, I would be scared out of my mind. So it'd have to be something so big, but also it would be so gut-wrenching to do it. So do you know anything about her process of getting to the point where she reached out?
My guess, and this is more just my own thought on it, I think she just was so consumed with the guilt of starting to really see into Tony's an innocent man, but my bosses have made me participate in all these illegal behaviors, and kind of just wanting to do the right thing, because I think she was she realized if not now, then at some point it's going to have to hit the fan. And so for her, I think she cared so deeply about justice that it was something that she kind of I think it just came to a head for her. Do you guys feel the same?
Yeah, and I think it's a mix too of, at that point, Tony was already found guilty of the federal crimes. He was accused of both federal and state crimes, which were the same. And so when Dawn was found,
right? He was charged essentially with the same thing because the state and the federal government are considered separate sovereigns.
Exactly. Yeah.
But the interesting thing about that, though, is even though they are considered separate sovereigns under American law, rarely did the state and the federal government prosecute you for the exact same thing. It doesn't happen every day. Usually, like even in the sniper shootings, for example, in Washington, D.C. with John Muhammad and Leroy Malveaux, they could have been charged federally and locally, but they said, why would we waste all these resources doing it? Why do we know why they did it in this case?
I think it was just that this task force was going after people like left and right. It almost seems like anybody who had a real estate license like should have been afraid, even if they weren't dealing with mortgages. Because they were going after so many people. right after the housing crisis. Like everybody wants to blame somebody. So not only do they blame as many people as they can, but they double down and make it federal and state.
Yeah. And I think too, like when we talk about the task force, like the people who were indicted, like we're talking well over 1,000, 1,100 people. So a lot, like that's a lot of people. That's a lot of trials. That's a lot of court hearings, all of that. So, it's so vast too that it kind of, for some people, I think they just wanted to plead, serve their time, and move
they
on.
want the vast
Like
majority
just
of those
check the
people
box, like fine, like I know I didn't do it, but whatever. Which is unfortunate that they were even in that spot. But I think for some people, like that's just how they treated it. But Tony, knowing how much time he could have faced, granted he did serve like 9.5 years, which is still a lot of time. But yeah, I think it's just, he said he refused to plead guilty and talk to the media and never said no comment. Even when we have conversations with him today, like he's always so candid about his experience and all that, which I think, yeah, very much so. It's exactly like all of our meetings with him, which is good because this case is so layered and nuanced, and like we're not mortgage professionals, like we don't know that side of things, so it's easy to kind of get lost in like the terminology and the legalese of it all too.
Well, and I also think there's a resource thing on the prosecutor side, right? Like if I have that many cases, the way I'm going to be successful is getting the highest percentage of people to plead, because there's no way I have the resources to do that many cases. So it also begs the question, why would you go after him twice? But that is something I suspect we're not going to get an easy answer to. Why would you go both ways?
I think too, when you ask what pushed Dawn to reach out to Tony, it was bigger than Tony. She knew it was bigger than Tony. There are a lot of people being accused of doing things that they did not do. She played a role in that. And I think that she thought, if we can get Tony in the state case to be, it's found not guilty, then we can help others. And so she cared about Tony, but she also cared about all of the other people.
Well, one of the most powerful things in your first Seeking Justice episode that I listened to was hearing Tony talk about Dawn reaching out to him and not even being able to get the words out, and then doing it again, and then saying to her, and him being worried that something was wrong with her, because at this point he doesn't know she works in the prosecutor's office, and being very, very concerned for her, and then her finally getting to the point where she's like, I want to tell you, but don't interrupt me. You can't interrupt me. And the promise, like, I'm just trying to imagine the level of anxiety for somebody in that kind of situation, and probably on Tony's end too, the level of worry for this woman who's helping him, and then probably shock on his side. And I don't know whether she felt a sense of relief or more anxiety. Do you guys have any?
I can't imagine. I can't imagine. I can't imagine my 26-year-old self in Dawn's position. I think she was very brave. She was very strong. She was very afraid. She was trying to protect herself around every corner. She was, asking people or finding out ways where she could communicate so that nobody would know. She was going to extremes. I think when she first started saying these things to Tony, like, we can't meet here, or we need to do this, or I can't email you that way, we have to do it this way. She had a plan that she was following, and she was really afraid of the people she worked for finding out what she was doing. And I think that tells you something, I think that's, you can have your normal, like, well, I'm probably going to get, this could blow up and bad things could happen. And Dawn was in the position too, where she was being pursued by the FBI. They had reached out to her. That was her dream, to become an FBI agent. She wanted to work for the FBI. She had a background in finance and criminal justice. So she was
right up the alley.
Yes. And so, and I think she didn't want to blow that. You know, she didn't want to blow that opportunity, but she was so afraid of her bosses. She was so driven to do the right thing that I think she just felt like she didn't have a choice. And so she was
Put her in a box.
creating these, she was creating ways to protect herself.
Yeah. And I think at that age too, like, you don't know what you don't know. You know, like, you think you're still kind of coming into your own, you're understanding the world, and, like, you know, being a career woman at that point, like, and trying to really take it seriously, and then to have all these extra factors around it, like, weigh very heavily on her physically, but emotionally too. And I think she was very, like Dana said, she was incredibly scared, because how do you even tell people in your inner circle that? You know, like, what would they, it's just, people using their power for such awful reasons. So when you think about what Dawn had to experience day in and day out, and we all know too from just past jobs, like, you know, the things that would be said around the water cooler and things like that, like, you wouldn't relay to clients or anything, but like, God only knows what else she knew beyond this situation.
Right.
So
right, which communicated.
It's vast.
Well, I also think, like, prosecutors already have an enormous amount of power, like, more than police officers or other people. And so that's something to, you know, sort of be in awe of mildly, but an unethical prosecutor, that's pretty dangerous. And then with all the things we find out later in the story about the prosecutors, I could completely understand why she'd be in absolute panic. Walk me through sort of what happened in Tony's case once Dawn came forward and to the point where we get to her death.
So we know that after Dawn starts helping Tony, when he's putting his list together of witnesses who are going to testify on his behalf in the state trial, Dawn's name gets put on there because she says, listen, like, I want to testify. I want to talk about what I saw at the prosecutor's office. I want to share the misconduct that's going on.
At that point, is she still
at that point? She's not.
She had left. Okay.
Yes. And so the prosecutors were threatening her, saying that she violated a confidentiality agreement that actually didn't even exist. But it scared her enough to kind of like take pause in the situation of, oh my God, they're threatening to put me in prison for helping you. And I think that's where a lot of the stress started to build up for Dawn.
Did she have a lawyer through any of this? Did she have her own counsel?
No.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
No, I can't imagine either. You know, we know towards the end, she was so afraid of the prosecutors and feeling like she was being followed and that her apartment was not a safe place to be. She stayed with her parents for 3 weeks. And while she was there ahead of trial, her parents remember Dan Caceres, one of her bosses, and some other person coming to the house and looking for technology. They were looking for computers. They were looking for hard drives.
This was to the parents' house or her apartment? To her apartment?
To her
parents' house.
Yeah.
To her parents' home. And Dan is the lead prosecutor or her primary boss as
her primary boss. Yeah. And, you know, Dawn's dad said, come back with a warrant. Like, you can't come to our house and make requests like that. And they never did come back. But it was, again, like, it's just showing more that these people were, they're willing to go to your parents' house and, like, to see where you're hiding out ahead of trial. And I mean, again, just feeling like there's no place that's really safe, I think was really starting to get to Dawn.
Okay. Yeah. So was she had an apartment, right?
Yeah, she had her own apartment.
But she was staying with her parents because of her concern, like wanting
she
to
just
be around.
Didn't feel safe. Yeah. I think the pressure of it all was weighing so heavily. And I think there was a lot of the line between professional work life and home life was starting to blur because they wanted her to bring hard drives home and to dispose of them and things like that. So just nothing felt safe to her.
Yeah. PSA for kids: when your bosses ask you to take hard drives home to dispose of them, something is
Never a
very,
good
very
sign.
Something's really wrong.
wrong.
Yes.
So one of the things I know I read about in reading the story is that substance abuse started to become a problem and increasing, it sounds like, over time. Is this sort of like correlated to the stress around this, or?
We think so. Yeah. I think just the pressure of it all and kind of needing an outlet and I think some of it just stems from she's young. So of course you don't have the right awareness to know of other outlets for that sort of thing. But I think she relied heavily on alcohol. But I do
See,
think she was trying
I don't
towards
think
the
we can
end.
limit that to young people.
Yeah. And I think towards the end she was trying
If
to
you're
make what's
planning
right.
to get to a point where you get older
Yeah.
and all of a sudden they're wiser about that, give it up now.
That's so funny.
Well,
Yeah.
we were meeting yesterday and my husband pops in and he has a bottle of Traveler whiskey. It's a new
Yeah.
release. And he brings it in and we're all we're talking and he's like, look what I got you. And I was like, thanks. Can't wait to try it. But it was just, I was like, whoa.
Perfect timing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so there was sort of like it kind of makes sense, right? Like the more, like, one of the things that we know with addiction, the more isolated you are, the more dangerous it becomes, and instantly
Yeah.
knowing secrets like this in a situation becomes more isolating, which then, instead of talking to people and processing things, the substances become a part of it.
Yeah.
And her, like, before she died, her parents had come to the house and
Yeah.
removed the alcohol. Was that at her request, or was she open with them about how much she was drinking? How did that all come
I
about?
think from my understanding of it, I think her parents, they were very aware of her drinking situation. So they were trying to mitigate what they could. So the night before she was found deceased, her parents were over at her apartment. Actually, to back it up, so she returned to her apartment on that Sunday. And I believe on that Monday, she had a job interview because she had since been fired from her job at the prosecutor's office.
Right.
And so she was found deceased on a Wednesday for context.
How
And
how close to her death was she fired?
It was, I believe it was months. Like it
Okay.
wasn't
Yeah.
immediate.
Okay. And was she
Yeah.
fired because of this, or did they state a reason for why she was fired?
So
they said it's all you.
Yeah, they say it was related to substance abuse, and they have it all in, like, written down in emails that allegedly Dawn was, like, slurring her speech at work, and that she refused to take a drug test, and so they fired her. I think it's interesting that something like that is documented the way that it is, just because knowing how things ended a couple months later, it's just very interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
Oh no, yeah.
Lexi, you were telling us about the job interview.
Yeah. So she had interviewed on that Monday, which I guess would have been the 23rd, I think. And so Tuesday night, her parents came over to her apartment, and in our conversations with the parents, it was common practice for them to kind of sweep the apartment for alcohol just to make sure that wasn't in there. But it did seem like Dawn was starting to kind of take the right steps to move forward from this. And so I guess they left around like 8. They left in the evening, and Dawn was in her apartment, and then sometime in the early morning hours of Wednesday, April 25th, was when we believe that Dawn died. We don't know for certain, but we do know that there was a phone call. There was an inbound phone call because there was 3 phones found in her apartment. So
someone called her and she picked up. Is that or?
So there were, like Lexi was saying, there were multiple phones found in the apartment after she is later found deceased. And there is a silver Samsung flip phone with an unknown owner. We don't know whose phone it is. That phone had an outgoing call to Dawn's cell phone at 4:39 a.m., but it calls into question because based on the time of that phone call, the medical examiner put her in, based on her state of rigor mortis, at time of death 8 to 12 hours beforehand, which would mean that Dawn passed away at least a couple hours before this phone call was made to her cell phone. And again, that phone is found in her
And
apartment.
then the phone is found in the
Yeah.
apartment. And what did the
Mhm.
medical examiner say she died from?
So they said it was alcohol abuse.
Yeah.
And then
So
it was just an overdose.
acute. Yeah, and I think we were talking off mic that one of the things that I looked at when I saw that part, because it really struck me, like 0.59 really struck me as a blood alcohol level, because, and we were talking about this before, you know, your body like attempts to reject poison once it starts to kill you, right? Like, and so I looked up the lethal dose for 50% of the population, which is called the LD50. You know, half the people die at this much alcohol, and it's 0.4. It's around a 0.4. And I just thought to myself, like, that doesn't even, like, it doesn't operate on a clear bell curve. So it must be like slightly unheard of for someone to be able to successfully get up to a 0.59 without throwing up or letting it go. It's part of the reason
Absolutely.
why, like, you know, even people attempting to commit suicide, and I'm not going to give like a prescription for how to do it the right way right now, but if they're
Good. Thank you.
yeah, right.
We don't want that.
No, it's Patreons only. No. But it, yeah, it doesn't happen the way that I guess people say in the movies. So that one part of the case, just, you know, I find it as unrealistic as the story of Ellen Greenberg stabbing herself 20 times. Like, it's absurd. Like, this,
Yeah.
it would require such weird things for it to happen that it just feels implausible.
Yes. I mean, we've done a ton of research into this as well, and we cannot fathom that she consumed that alcohol. She drank that much alcohol. We
Was there
know that,
evidence of alcohol around?
yes, I mean, there were bottles of alcohol, but there's other things that kind of contradict it. So there was no vomit. She was fully clothed. She had a belt on, her jeans. There was no, like, the apartment was not messy. So you would think if someone's really, really drunk, they'd be bouncing around or, knocking
Delirium,
things
right.
over, all kinds of things like that. And there's no evidence of that at all.
Yeah. And for context, she was maybe 110, 115 pounds. So we're not talking about like a large woman to begin with, which kind of adds to the suspicion of it all.
Interesting. And so, you know, the Emmys report, like, one of the things, you know, and of course we'll jump back to other stuff. I know that it was eventually reevaluated again. Not the Emmys report, the initial investigation. What was the police department that initially looked into it? It was a local,
Parma Police.
Parma Police, and then the state Emmy. How did it get reexamined? How did that even come about?
So it actually hasn't fully been re-examined. It's been what am I trying to say? Like, the request has been made for the case to go to the Ohio BCI, but Parma Police has not moved any documents. There has
That's
been
like
no
the Ohio FBI, right? Bureau of Criminal. Yeah.
Yeah. So truly, the local Parma Police Department, they are the only ones who have taken a look at this case. And I think, going back to part of your original question about this being, ruled an alcohol death, one of the things that we think is pretty strange was at Dawn's apartment, there were papers found from a previous alcohol hospitalization that she had. And we have later learned that an anonymous person, someone requested those documents before she died. And so we don't really know if they got a hold of them or whatever that situation is. But my point being that when the police arrived on the scene, there was already a bias of, we see alcohol bottles, we see open bottles, there's some stuff in the trash related to alcohol. So you have that. And then you see old hospital papers from a previous alcohol incident. And then you see a young woman on the ground, and you put it all together really quickly and say, this must be an alcohol death. So that's really, it seems like what the running theory became. And then when the medical examiner, when the investigator came out to the scene, by the time that they had brought Dawn's body to the pathologist, it's at the top of the paper that she consumed alcohol. So then even the autopsy
so the investigators are passing on to the medical examiner out of the gate.
Yeah.
So all these, it starts to bias the case, right? Like we were talking about the idea of, that there, even though it shouldn't happen this way, and even though, I think like in my experience in dealing with detectives, like maybe when I was a kid, I would have thought the exception would be the callous detective. And what I realized in covering police, the one who is like really there to avenge the dead and treats everybody the same is actually, unfortunately, the exception. And that's not knocking investigators. It is a rough job. It's a hard job, but it's hard not to take shortcuts or not to prioritize based on, the heat you're going to get.
Yeah. And I think too, in this case, like it's understandable to potentially think about that, like that someone else could have made the call to kind of cover things up or just make things look a certain way, because knowing that she had really high powered bosses and things like that, and she, if she did come forward with this information, she would have probably changed the game, truth be told.
Well, I would expect, like, even if they weren't being shady, just like covering things like this, I would expect there would have been a phone call, because it's their former employee and it's a witness in a case they're involved in. They probably, I mean, whether it's appropriate or what was said, like who the heck knows. But if somebody came to me and said that there was no contact, I would be like, okay, now we're starting with lying, guys. Okay. Because it would just be. So what was the impact of Dawn's death on Tony's case?
I could take this one.
Yeah, it's all you, Andrea.
So what's interesting about the day that Dawn was found dead in the evening, so it was Wednesday, April 25th, this was the last day of Tony's state trial. So Dawn was going to be the last witness coming in with documents to talk about the misconduct, and then obviously to present the evidence that exonerated Tony. And
so this is the end of the defense after the prosecution's case in chief, end of the defense's main case. Now we're bringing in the witness who says, oh, they've been hiding all this and this is not. So like sort of your star witness for the defense. Like,
I mean, essentially, yeah. And so when Dawn obviously doesn't show up for court, they immediately move to closing arguments and the jury starts deliberating. So when Dawn is found deceased at the end of that day, the next morning on the 26th, Tony is brought up to court and Judge Daniel Gall makes an announcement to everybody that Dawn Pasela, who would have spoken the day before, who wasn't able to come in, she was found deceased in her home. And, I think, and Tony talks about this in previous interviews, and he's going to talk about it more next week in our episode. But the courtroom is kind of in shock that there are a lot of people who are very upset because it's shocking. You have a woman who she was about to speak about unspeakable misconduct and she's found dead.
We're even thinking about it from Tony's perspective. Here's this woman who befriended me because her bosses were doing this X, Y, or Z, who was like brave enough, because like we all have a hard enough time like admitting our minor mistakes. Rarely do we like voluntarily, without pressure, turn to somebody and say, we've betrayed you in an enormous way And then on top of that, add that not only have I betrayed you, I'm now willing to help you. And this could keep you from going into prison. Like, I'm just trying to imagine sitting in his shoes in that moment where he first heard she was dead. How, like, not just his case, but this person, right? Like, how rare is it we run into somebody in our own lives who's willing to, like, basically turn themselves in for something
Mhm.
that huge? And then,
Mhm.
I mean, it's just rare. It's just rare.
Yeah.
And
I think both
Yeah.
Dawn and Tony are two unique individuals in this entire situation. Tony has said, like, you know, he's made comments just in private conversations, even of like he would have served time forever, if it meant that Dawn's outcome wasn't what it was. And even that is such a sacrifice. So I think, to your point, it's like unthinkable that someone would kind of be in that situation.
yeah. Yeah, no, I yeah. I mean, and this is why I say, like, when listening to the story, like, you can't make it up. Like, this
Mhm.
is
No.
like the Hollywood. Yeah, it wouldn't even land with a Hollywood treatment. Like, does Tony talk about that? Talk about what that moment felt like when he heard that? What does he say?
I I mean, he has told us that he was in shock. He was, devastated. He carried guilt. I mean, he immediately felt guilty because, she was helping him.
Yeah,
And I think it was just pure, he was devastated by it. And not, like you said, not just because she didn't testify. I mean, the jury was deliberating. So that piece was over and done. It was the loss of Dawn, the fears that he knew she had, all
Mhm.
the extra steps she was taking to be safe. Now we're just he realized how serious those really were. She was possibly right to have those fears. I mean, the what happened could be directly related.
yeah. Well, one of the things that really struck me in your interview with him, which I really recommend people go back and listen to your first episode, was this: he was telling the story of, like, finding out about it, right? I was waiting for
Mhm.
him to say, and I felt so betrayed, right? Like, because that's going to be the natural reaction. But one of the things that really struck me in just the way he was naturally talking about it was his just genuine concern for her, and
That's
being
who he
so concerned
Mhm.
about, like, her anxiety or her worry or thinking something might have been going on in her personal life, and he still cared enough to engage about it like that. I mean, yeah, like, in some ways, just the loss. Yeah, it's
Tony will say over and over again when we're talking to him, "Well, I'm no saint." And I think that we disagree. I think that, we have learned enough about Tony to know that he has a huge heart. He is a real people person. He cares about people. He built his business to, be successful, but he did that through caring about his customers, caring about the employees who worked for him. And so we feel very lucky to have met Tony, and we just think we can't say enough good things about Tony.
so. Sophie has a question, which we probably haven't said super clearly, and it's about the specific misconduct that she uncovered. So maybe just sort of like summing up what the bullet point list of what we thought she would testify to might be helpful.
Mhm. So, and just to say, Sophie, we're not trying to be shady and like keep it from like sharing.
Acceptable.
We know Tony is going to speak at length about this next week in our episode, and obviously a lot of this information is already online. So again, we're not trying to hide anything from you. The high level points of the misconduct that she first witnessed was as the office manager, since it was her job to kind of look over the evidence in all of these over 1,000 cases. Like Dana was talking about earlier, the way that the evidence was first being handled was just incorrect. So nothing is being locked. Anybody can have access to things. And Dawn was telling friends and family that she noticed that files were going missing, evidence in cases was being destroyed. Her signature to get files in and out of whatever process they had, her signature was being falsified. And so people were faking being her, trying to get evidence. So that's one thing. There's a woman that Tony will talk about in our episode next week who began in this case as a defendant. So she was being accused of these crimes. And by the end of the story, you will learn she's essentially no longer a defendant. There's a woman who was sleeping with one of the prosecutors. And she has
one of my favorite characters in this whole.
Yes. Her name is Catherine Clover, and she has her hand in pretty much all of these cases, which is just highly illegal and unethical. And of course,
when you say hand, what do you mean?
So Dawn witnessed Catherine Clover, first of all, getting her own office inside of the task force. So, I mean, just like taking a step back and thinking about that.
Right?
She was a defendant. She was being accused of mortgage fraud.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then
so
the defendant now has an office in prosecutor's
the
office.
task force that's supposed to prosecute her, which is just unheard of. And she develops what ends up being a documented sexual affair with Dan Caceres, again, Dawn's boss. And Dan Caceres often used Catherine Clover as a witness in cases. So Catherine Clover would go up on the stand and lie about a lot of things within this case. And so Dawn witnessed all of this start to happen. And the chain of command of who she would be able to tell about this misconduct were the people doing the misconduct. And so that was making a lot of impact in this case.
So with Catherine, she was testifying in multiple cases, had an office was a defendant, had an office in the prosecutor's office, and had a romantic relationship with, was it Dawn's boss?
Dan Caceres. Yep.
Okay. The prosecutor.
Okay. Wow.
So, yep, you'll hear a lot more about her next week. But so, yeah, like I said, she had her hand in a lot of stuff that was going on at the task force.
Was any of the, I know that prosecutors never keep all of the information that they collect because they collect plenty of information that may not be relevant or they don't know it's relevant at the time. Was any of the information that she felt was being thrown out considered exculpatory in any of the cases? Or that she thought was exculpatory or suggested that the defendants didn't actually commit the crime?
Well, yeah, I mean, Dawn, one of the things of the documents that she kept and then ended up giving to Tony to help exonerate him in his state trial, it was a document that I don't know all the mortgage stuff. I know Tony can say this much better than me, but essentially the document proved that not only Tony, but a lot of other people who were accused of this mortgage fraud and making no money down loans and things of that nature. Anyway, that they were not defrauding banks, that the banks knew what they were doing. And
which
so
is sort of like the key for mortgage fraud. It's not so much like what you do, because there are plenty of things that are legal to do with like a mortgage or a financial instrument, as long as the parties have knowledge that's what you're doing, right? So like the question becomes, who knew what, and what documentation do you have that says these people knew that?
Yeah, so I think Dawn really realized this when she sat in on a meeting with a bank, and they were going over documents and they were handing them to the banker and saying, is this loan legit? Is this what you really were offering to people? And he went down through and he's like, yeah, this is what we were doing. And so Dawn realized at that moment, there's absolutely no fraud here. Like, I don't know what you're doing, but this is not. And she brought that to their attention. If this is your case, they just admitted that these loans are legit. So how are you going to charge these people? And they kind of ignored her. They didn't want to hear that.
Wow. Wow. And Tony's telling us that some of the evidence that she gave him included FBI reports, bank lending program documents, and sort of showed that the theory was wrong. And then Sophie, who's always researching, mentioned that
Yes.
Dan dumped his laptop. Tell me about
You
that.
got it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Generally
So-
not a sign, not a good sign.
Of innocence, that's for sure.
No. Just after Dawn's body is found, there are personal emails that have been made public where Dan Caceres admits that he dumped and got rid of his laptop, which again, and I'm sure Tony will pop a comment here, missing laptops and missing files is a common thread in his case in the federal trial. The laptops go missing, and then
Computers go missing.
yeah.
Hard drive.
Dawn's computer is missing.
To all Tony's all the evidence that they collected,
For Tony's
supposedly, quote
trial.
unquote. Yeah.
From his office.
All missing.
Ones from
Mm-hmm.
or
And from
other
the-
offices, like
Yes.
real estate
Yep.
agents.
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And they still were able to go forward with the case. So in Tony's first trial, this is during his first trial. And that is that the state or the federal trial? That's the state trial. The first
Federal is the
Federal.
first one.
He is convicted or acquitted at that point. I
Convicted.
know convicted in the first one where Dawn doesn't show up, and then acquitted in the second one, right? Or am I
Yes.
wrong? Yeah.
Yes. But Dawn wasn't involved in the first trial. I mean, she wasn't going to testify in the first trial.
It was the
she was
second
testifying
trial.
in the second trial.
Mhm.
Okay, so
Mhm.
that makes sense. So you've got so she dies. The investigation begins by the local police department. Tony, you said, spent 9 years, right? 9 years in jail. And Tony had mentioned in the chat, and you guys had mentioned that the investigation hasn't been reopened, but the sheriff's department did look into it. What prompted that? What prompted the sheriff's department to look into the investigation itself? Was there a complaint, a concern, the parents' efforts,
So there's a local attorney. Her name is Kim Corral, and she's an absolute rock star. And she's been working on Tony's case and then also by extension Dawn's case. And she was able to get the sheriffs to relook at the case. And we have some great documents from just their recommendations of what should be redone, what wasn't done correctly the first time when Dawn's body was found. And it's their recommendation that Dawn's case gets reopened by Parma. But ultimately, even after that recommendation, Parma simply refused. So that's why the case has never been reopened by Parma.
Okay, so it's never, even though the recommendation is on the table. So I'm going to shift gears for a second. How do you guys end up together pursuing this case, and like why, out of all the many different cases, why this case and why this format? It sounds like Andrea came to you first.
Mm-hmm.
How?
Yeah. So I obviously learned about the case from Tony reaching out to Uncovered. And I mean, it was pretty much a thing where like we agreed as Uncovered to put Dawn's case on the site. And that's pretty much like as far as the Uncovered commitment went. It was, yep, we're going to visualize our case. We're going to research it, do the timeline, do the narrative, do the whole thing. And we're going to post it on the site. And like, that's as much as we can promise. But even after as Uncovered, the three of us like fulfilled that promise, we found ourselves keep coming back to the case. And again, I think it comes back to a lot of what we were saying before of like Dawn was someone that we could see ourselves being friends with and feeling like this kind of kinship to her and to her case. Felt like we had to keep doing more about it. I personally, I was also drawn to Dawn's case because last summer, my mom actually passed away from an alcohol death. And so, thank you. And so like having Dawn's case essentially like in my back pocket at this time, we were starting to do a lot more for the case. We were bringing in other experts and trying to learn about a bunch of stuff. And so having that paralleled with my mom's textbook alcohol death, it kind of gave me a new perspective of I had the experience with my mom's death that was what everything should have been, like the proper alcohol death investigation. And so going through that and then revisiting Dawn's case was for me just so much more glaring of something is wrong because I now personally know what the right thing was and what the right death scene looked like and how the ME was supposed to handle things, how the police are supposed to handle things. And then so having that and then again experiencing everything with Dawn's case, it just kind of drove me more to say like there's something wrong here and we have to do something about it.
What were the things that stuck out to you that were different?
So one of the main things, and we know about this with Dawn's case, is there were 6 police officers who arrived on the scene after her parents in the apartment building called for a wellness check, which 6 is a lot. And her family has even said before that, with a couple different wellness checks that they made, only 2 officers arrived. So first with my mom, it's the same thing. 2 officers arrived. That's like what you would expect. And then some other just quick things with my mom's death. And I know Dana talked about this before of just some things that you would see in an alcohol death. There was evidence of like my mom's body shutting down, like what you would normally have with alcohol of trying to expel what you've consumed. And, other things of like stuff being knocked around because again, you're intoxicated. In Dawn's case, we don't see any of that. And then even down to like the police, my mom passed away in Stanhope, New Jersey. So it's like super suburban. The police talked to the neighbors, just to like get a better idea of my mom and like what her story was. In Dawn's case, they never spoke to the neighbors. They never even pulled security cam footage in the apartment. And you're talking about people are sharing walls, in my mom's death, there's acres between other houses. So it's just like the way that my mom's death was handled versus how Dawn's death was handled. But ultimately, the ruling is the same. It just doesn't make sense.
Has it been hard for you with your mom's death I was just thinking that like, I'm not sure whether it would be therapeutic or whether it would be painful or whether
No, it's a good question. I think I'm still trying to figure out the answer for myself, but I lean very heavily on Dana and Lexi of just this whole process of, I feel like I've been going through my own grieving process with my mom, but so much of working on Dawn's case feels cathartic because it's, again, knowing what is a genuine alcohol death and then seeing this to someone who I feel like could have been my friend, it's just more of a reason to want to fight for a reinvestigation, honestly.
Yeah. It's in a weird way, like it allows you to, it's gonna sound weird, but my mom passed away in October. And it allows you to take something out of that bad thing that happened to you, that really bad thing, and turn it into something good for people. And, I tell people all the time, like, my mom dying, nothing like I expected, but one of the things that I didn't expect, in addition to like the loneliness and all that stuff, is that there can be gifts from loss. And it's nice to be able to have the opportunity to turn them into something good. And I talk about the same thing with my career at the New York Times, where, I plagiarized, I fabricated, created giant scandals, and created all sorts of mess. But it's amazing to be at a point right now where so much good can come out of it. So, I'm thinking of, as you're talking about that, what a mixed blessing it is, but what a blessing it still is for you. Like, who would have thought in the moment where you were dealing with that stuff with your mom that in less than a year, you would be taking that and turning it into something good for someone's life. And it's kind of admirable.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Thank you.
Absolutely.
you're welcome.
It's one of those things, and sorry to hear about your mom. I know grief is never linear, and sometimes it sneaks up on you. I think it was just so interesting for for me with everything. My mom's name is actually also Dawn, and so when we started to learn about Dawn's case and researching it last spring, there was always like something in me of, I always kind of felt like my mom was going to succumb to her own addictions and that it would kind of end similarly, but then to have it be so paralleled. I mean, I remember when I was on the phone with the medical examiner in my mom's death, of like going over the autopsy report with them about my mom. And so much of what I was doing for her was really for me, for Dawn's case, because there was so much of like, you have to explain this to me. I have to understand the BAC. I have to understand all this stuff, because I was trying to apply the same knowledge to Dawn. And I feel like, again, it's just kind of giving me another reason to really push for this.
Yeah. Well, it's awesome. I admire it. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, as
we
do
do too. Yeah.
Quite often we let her know that.
I wanted to add to that. So, we all have what drove us towards the case. And I think from my perspective, part of it is the work that Tony did. So for 9.5 years in prison, he was requesting documents. He was pulling files. He was, working really, really hard to gather all of the information that you'll see in the evidence locker. And that was not just for him. That was because he was fighting for Dawn. And I think, to have all of that information we can look at the scene and we can, say this, or we can hear what Tony says, but when he backs it up with a document, there's no doubting that, that's a source and that is valid. And that proves everything that Tony is saying. And so I think that for me, it was his work needs to now help Dawn's family. We need, he needs help with that. He assembled a team that is incredible. He has a PI, he has attorney Kim Carell, he has Yale Law School involved in this, and they're looking at, they're handling some requests for documents, determining whether or not they should be released or not. I mean, he has an amazing team of people. He pulled all of them together, and then he reached out to us. And I think we feel so grateful that he did, because it is a very strong, very focused team. And my hope is that the result of seeking justice, the result of all of Tony's work and everybody who's involved, will lead to Dawn's cause of death being changed from natural to homicide, and a review of the case so that we can know, even if they change it to undetermined, just it wasn't natural. We do not believe that.
I was going to ask you, like, who can pull that lever? Who can change, like, legally? Is it
a medical examiner or a pathologist?
The state medical examiner?
Yeah.
So it really is like the Greenberg case, where like it's the stubbornness of the state medical examiner. Not, it's just so funny to me. I was recently having a conversation with actually a prosecutor about this, which is like, it is so hard for professionals to like turn around and kind of do what Dawn did, which is like say, I'm wrong, I screwed up, I want to do things a little bit differently. And I think if more of us could do that, probably myself included, I think we'd be in a much better place in our personal relationships and our professional work when it comes to things like this and injustice. Just being willing to be sort of like humble enough to let go of the idea, like, I thought this guy was guilty. Like, so much of this, if they just could have conceded in the beginning, I thought this guy was guilty, and oh, oops, we were wrong. Right? Like, we're not. Because regardless of whether it's a homicide or it's not, it's a safe bet that she probably wouldn't have died then if
Mhm.
those things
Mhm.
hadn't happened, no matter what you believe about it. I want to give you guys a chance for closing thoughts, give anybody in the chat a chance to ask you guys some questions. But I just wanted to like see what, I mean, I think as much as I find it moving the case, I find Don's story moving. I find Tony moving personally. I find like the fact that it seems like Tony would pursue this case, Don's case for justice, even if he were exonerated, tomorrow. I find all that moving, but I also find like listening to you guys today, and I know you, Dana, and where you're coming from, and Lexi, hearing you talk about it, and especially you, Andrea, listening to you talk about that, like, it's really, as much as I'm impressed by those other things, I'm impressed by you guys. The fact that you would take time out of your lives, I'm sure you're not making billions on this, or probably anything. It's
Mhm.
less than nothing negative. But that you would take your time, you would put your hearts, you would put your emotions into this. And I want to give you just a chance for any closing thoughts that you want to share with people.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I would say for, my closing thought truly is that Dawn deserves an investigation, and knowing what we know about her case, and we're really looking forward to viewers and listeners learning the same amount, that at the end of the day, her death was not properly investigated. Whatever you want to think about what the ruling should be, of whether it was, actually a homicide or not, that regardless, her death was not investigated the way it should have been. And just a reinvestigation will, we think, bring up new evidence that would prove that something suspicious happened.
Mm.
Mhm.
Dana?
So I feel strongly that this case was botched, purposely or maybe not purposely. I mean, I can't be sure of that, but I feel like Dawn, as Andrea said, Dawn's family deserves a reinvestigation, another look, someone who would walk into this unbiased, in comparison to what the first medical examiner may have been told or believed. It is heartbreaking to listen to her parents talk about this case. They share all of these little pieces that are questions. Where did the phones go? Where is the laptop? Who called her that night as they were leaving? Who was there with her the previous night? Why?
Nobles that are unknown, things that could have been
Right, exactly. They just want to know these answers, and it is around every corner that the Parma Police Department will shut them down on that. They don't want to discuss it. They don't talk to them about it. And so it's re-victimization in my mind. They lost their daughter, but now they can't even get a straight answer. And I think that, my goal is for them to get answers.
answers.
Mhm.
Answers for the family. How about you, Lexi?
Yeah, I mean, I echo exactly what Andrea and Dana had said. I mean, as we've gotten to know her parents, it's just reinforces that, like, they need justice for their daughter. Like, it is so obvious that something went awry. We don't know necessarily where that was, but something did happen. But I also do feel so incredibly hopeful that seeking justice could really be that platform to quite literally seek justice for Dawn in this case. And I am so lucky that I get to work with Dana and Andrea on this, because I feel like we really make the best team in the world to kind of go on all these little side missions and rabbit holes and all these things. Like, it's been a challenge, don't get me wrong. Like, it's been hard to understand it all. It's taken me 4 or 5 times to truly understand the case. But now that I'm here, it's like, we just got to get something done,
I have this image in my head, and I'm not going to ask you guys whether you're going to, but I could see this possibly being replicated again. We'll let you focus on the first case now. But could you real quickly for everybody, tell us where else we can find you guys in addition to Seeking Justice. I know Dana has her own podcast. Lexi, you're a co-host of one. Where can people find you guys in addition to Seeking Justice, and where can they find you for Seeking Justice?
Sure. So we have a website, Seeking Justice Media, that Andrea wonderfully created for us. So we have all of our YouTube episodes, and essentially we're taking both the YouTube content and putting it on a podcast stream, so you can find it probably on the Friday after we air there, because Dana's working really hard on that. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We started on we're only going to be on 2 platforms, and that quickly grew to 4.
You guys are the only ones who like my TikToks, so.
So it's been really fun to kind of expand our horizons that way. But yeah, so we can share a link tree with everyone of where we are, but I believe we're the Justice Show on TikTok, right? We're Seeking Justice Pod, I think, on TikTok, Seeking Justice on Facebook, and then Seeking Justice Pod, I think, on Instagram as well.
If you look that up, I think you'll find our little SJ. And if not,
yeah.
And then you're also co-hosting The Broken System with Robert.
I am.
Armour,
Yep.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So
that's a fun gig.
Yeah.
Sure.
Dana, where else can we find you?
You can find me at True Crime PI podcast on all of your favorite podcast platforms, and also on Instagram. It's under True Crime PI. You can search me on Twitter, same. Or I always say Twitter. I can't get it on X. I'm also on TikTok, but I'm not super active there.
I will go into
and
the
Facebook.
ground calling it Twitter.
I know.
It's
so hard. But I also have a Facebook group for True Crime PI and a Facebook page.
I didn't know that. Oh, cool.
Mm-hmm.
I will have to come join. And then last but not least.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty much on every platform, and I'm just Andrea and Cipriano. You'll find me there.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Are you still doing your blog?
Oh, my blog.
Yeah.
It's alive. It's out there. It's thecrimesheet.com. I mean, it's literally hasn't been touched since 2020, I guess. But I've got old stuff on there. You could find it.
Good stuff.
I will say that you can also, I'm only putting you on the spot, Andrea, because I love you, that you can find her on the News Nation show.
Yes,
that's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you
one out.
date on that? Have you gotten a date?
No, I don't know. I'm considered a citizen detective expert, which is way too nice. But I'm going to be featured in the new CW show called Crime Nation, and I'm going to be on the episode about the Gilgo Lisk situation, talking about the victims. So,
nice.
That's out there.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So it looks like we don't have any other questions that we didn't cover from the chat, guys. So drum roll, thank you. I won't do. I'll do my partial yada yada. Everybody can find us, God knows where, on every social media platform, even Threads. And we also have a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. And if you guys aren't in there, you should be in there because we talk about it.
I'm in there.
And I'm sure we will be talking about you more tomorrow. And then obviously, you guys can catch us on our Patreon as well. For this video, it's going to be on Patreon for a little while, but then when it comes out with the podcast episode, it will go live. And I don't know. I just feel lucky to have you guys here and have you guys a part of the fold. I find you very, very inspiring for me. So thanks a lot. I feel like I may have already said this in what's our chat called on Facebook? I forget what it's called.
Dana knows.
What's our Facebook chat?
Oh, it's Under the Sea or something.
Oh, yes.
Or, yeah. Or no, keeping your head above water.
Head above water. Right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, guys. I feel like that's pretty much a wrap on my
Mhm.
end. So we can jump back into the studio, and bye to everybody. Thank you for those of you who have come, even those of you who have already left because Jason goes on forever. All right. And you too, Tony. Thanks
Thank
a
you,
lot.
Tony.
Thank
and
you
thank
for
you,
having us,
Jason.
Jason. Thank you.
Yes.
You're welcome.